And I found that when you're rock climbing, you only have one thing to think about, and that's your next step. There's nothing else that exists in the world. And what I do in my practice, I try to apply the principles of the fact that it's like a chess match. You got one move. What's that move going to be? And the reason I try to get everyone to only move one step at a time, when you're dealing with highly intelligent people, their minds are racing 100 miles an hour. And there's a stream of consciousness that they may be able to understand. But to the mere idiot like me, I don't get it. I'm just not that smart. You got all that stuff coming at me. I don't know what to process. So where the flow state comes in, helping people in the mind to slow it down. Because what we're doing is we're eliminating the crowd. You're eliminating the noise. You cannot hit a flow state when your mind is filled with 100 things.
Hi, and welcome to What If with Leslie Grandy. In today's episode, we'll talk about the importance of emotional regulation to creative thinking. Creative problem solving is often framed as a cognitive skill, the ability to generate ideas, see patterns, or recombine concepts in novel ways. Yet in practice, creativity fails far more often because of emotional interference than because of intellectual limitation. Anxiety narrows our attention. Fear pushes people towards safe, familiar solutions. Frustration shortens patience with ambiguity. These emotional states quietly shape which ideas are considered, which are rejected, and how long a team is willing to explore the unknown. Emotional regulation, therefore, is not a soft adjunct to creativity. It's a foundational condition for it. It's critical for creative thinking because it allows individuals to harness the benefits of various emotions while minimizing their negative impacts. When I was working on my book, I consumed a lot of research on this topic. And the research suggests that although people have control over their emotions, they often fail to take action to manage, direct, or mitigate them, thus hindering their creative capacity. Emotional regulation is critical to achieving creative velocity because the creative process can be messy and fraught with emotional ups and downs. Creative thinking thrives when the mind is clear, steady, and open. And that's exactly what emotional regulation helps cultivate, by giving you the skill to respond intentionally instead of reactively, keeping your mental energy available for creative work. When your emotional energy is in check, you're more likely to push through obstacles, try again, and explore alternatives. Stoicism is a philosophy of emotional regulation in service of better thinking and better decisions. And although Stoicism is often misunderstood as emotional suppression or detachment, its actual focus is emotional clarity. The Stoics were deeply concerned with how unexamined emotions distort judgment and lead people to act reactively rather than wisely. At the heart of Stoic thought is a distinction that matters enormously for creative work. And that's the difference between what is within our control and what is not. Outcomes are uncertain by definition. New ideas may fail. External conditions often shift. Stoic discipline redirects attention to how to recover from unexpected setbacks. This is the driver behind the emotional regulation coach GPT that I created. I wanted to remind myself that what I control is my reaction to any moment of distress. It serves as a practical and supportive tool for developing self-awareness and control in the face of emotional triggers. When you begin to understand that you have agency over how you respond to external stimuli, rather than simply reacting on autopilot, you create space between impulse and action. And that space is where transformation happens. It's where you can pause, reflect, and choose a response that aligns with your values, your goals, and current needs, rather than being swept away by immediate emotion. Whether you're dealing with frustration, anxiety, disappointment, or you just feel overwhelmed, the act of naming what you're feeling and intentionally choosing how to respond is a powerful act of self-leadership. One underappreciated benefit of collaborating with generative AI is the psychological distance it creates. When a tough problem is emotionally charged to a human, like when there are high stakes or a lot of personal accountability or reputational risk, people tend to narrow their thinking without even realizing it. They protect what feels close. Gen AI introduces a degree of separation, and that distance makes it easier to uncover options that would otherwise feel too risky, unrealistic, or uncomfortable to voice. When people collaborate with generative AI from a regulated emotional state, the system becomes a powerful ally in creative problem solving. It helps teams rehearse futures without panicking about them. It supports imagination without replacing our responsibility. This is the Stoic ideal brought into modern practice: clear perception, deliberate action, and steadiness under uncertainty. All of this is the context for my conversation with Chuck Garcia. Chuck has spent decades operating and advising in environments where pressure is constant and mistakes are costly. From Wall Street to corporate boardrooms, his work sits at the intersection of emotional intelligence, executive presence, and Stoic philosophy. In this conversation, we explore what actually happens to thinking under pressure, why temperament often matters more than intellect, and how small, practical acts of emotional regulation can change the quality of decisions people make when it matters the most. I hope you enjoyed this episode of What If with Leslie Grandy. I'm here today with Chuck Garcia, who is my inaugural guest for the What If with Leslie Grandy podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Chuck.
Well, thank you for having me, Leslie.
It's great to chat with you today. I'm excited to share a lot about your work, but first let me talk about who you are and then have you, in your own words, explain your journey. Chuck is a best-selling author, a Columbia University professor, a mountaineer, and a life elevation coach whose work blends emotional intelligence, executive presence, and Stoic philosophy to help guide leaders to transformational growth. And I find that topic to be super fascinating. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey in how you found out this was your passion, like this was a place where you really wanted to focus your energies. And also, how is it that you define a life elevation coach? I'm really curious by that title, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about what that means.
Well, I'll get to the second one first because it relates to something you said earlier about being a mountaineer. And when you're a mountaineer, and as in my first book called The Climb to the Top, it's a book that uses mountaineering as a metaphor for how to climb careers. But instead of the ice axe and the crampons that we use to climb mountains, it's all of the communication skills, techniques, and rhetorical devices I learned over my many years of being a public spokesman on Wall Street. But here's why we use those words for my branding. Something that surprised me as part of my journey, and I was like every other college kid, get A's in school, and it's the path to prosperity and success. So I get to a Wall Street bank and I found out, oh my God, what do you do when everyone else around you is a lot smarter than you? They went to much more prestigious schools. Oh my God, what's going to happen? But the patterns that I noticed didn't relate to that. The ones that I saw ascending the ladder, the ones that people were looking up to, there was something different about them. And it didn't matter where they went to school, what they did, how they got there. They were really good communicators. There was a certain presence about them. There was something about them that people wanted to get around. They wanted to be around that individual. They were clear, concise, and purposeful in the way that they communicated. They treated everybody with respect, and they delivered on their commitments. Those three things, Leslie, I wish if somebody had taught me the key to life in college, it would have been that. But instead, we crammed, we examined, we regurgitated. Okay, there's a certain value to that. But I say that because, going back to your question, I have helped hundreds, maybe thousands, but I coach a lot of executives. And I coach them on what was my first observation as a 22-year-old. How does someone communicate so well? And what I came to find out, it's a learned behavior. It's a skill, just like engineering and math. So to be a life elevation or an elevation coach is really using the skills and techniques that I did over my 25-year career on Wall Street. And for context, my companies were Bloomberg, BlackRock, and Citadel, three titans of the financial industry and how lucky I was to be under their tutelage. But I found that I could help people to elevate their careers based on what I did. And that's the reason I became a coach. So 10 years ago, after all my Wall Street years, didn't need to do that anymore. But I soon came to discover through my mountaineering journey, through the wonderful guides that led me up mountains all over the world, I saw the way that they found fulfillment in helping mere mortals like me getting to the summits of these treacherous mountains. And I began to see myself in that. I was like, wow, it was really revealing. I could do that. Not that I wanted to spend the rest of my life climbing mountains, but the expertise that I had developed and the reputation that I figured I could use that to leverage my capacity to teach someone. That is ultimately what I did. Formed my own company called Climb Leadership. I teach executives all over the world. And then at the same time, Columbia University came knocking on my door, and I teach in the Graduate School of Engineering the very things that I've just described to engineers and scientists.
It's so fascinating. I wish I'd have met you earlier in my career because I
I
think
wish I'd met me earlier in my career.
because one of the things that strikes me about your work, or especially around emotional intelligence and communication, is that when you're young, you feel it's inauthentic to squash or manage your emotions, and that the way that you react to something is important for people to see. Or if you feel like you're being disrespected, it's important to stand up for yourself and come back at that person and engage with a sort of an emotional reaction, a response that maybe reflects how you felt in that moment. And I think one of the things to this day that I focus on actively is regulating my emotions in the moment. And I'm curious, as you teach people, what tips for emotional regulation you offer people, and how much the part of managing and balancing emotions, equanimity, not just reading other people's emotions and managing the room, but really how you carry yourself in those environments that aren't working in your favor to actually get the results, the transformative results that you want. I'm really interested in this because I know this is something I continue to focus on.
Indeed. And in fact, what I didn't count on was how important emotional intelligence became to my own practice and to what I teach. And for context, Leslie, my second book is called The Moment That Defines Your Life. And it is the emotional companion to A Climb to the Top. But to me, they're opposite sides of the same coin. Let me start with the communication, and I'll get to your answer in just a second. When people communicate, there are three barriers, I'm speaking generally, to most people when they communicate. They say too much, they talk too fast, and it's not clear and concise. It's laced with filler words and, and like all these nonsense and noise. Now, add to that the element of pressure. Pressure changes everything. And what I came to find out over my career, my own conclusion, underestimate the importance of the intellect I described before, and yet overemphasize that and underemphasize the importance of temperament, the ability to stay calm under the weight of pressure and great expectations. Most people, Leslie, sadly, have never been taught how to regulate that, unless, and this is why I like hiring athletes over the years, if you had someone who's a pitcher, they know how to regulate their emotion because it's no longer about the pitch they throw, it's a headspace. You watch a quarterback on the football field, fourth down, 1 yard to go, 1 inch to go. What does Tom Brady do? The ultimate stoic. He has the memory of a goldfish. He has to forget all of those things that brought him to that place. Here's where my answer is. The most important technique to help regulate your emotion is brilliant in its simplicity, yet it baffles me why so many people don't do this. Now, I grew up in a military reservation. I grew up in West Point, New York, home of the United States Military Academy. So always surrounded by Army officers. And what they teach you in emotional regulation is something called the combat breath. Now, I don't like to use those military metaphors, but I remember that from as a kid. What did they teach a soldier on a battlefield? Well, the CEOs and the C-suite that I train, they feel like they're on a proverbial battlefield. They are under enormous pressure and expectation. And when they are expected to speak, especially when it's spontaneous and they haven't prepared anything, this is when the reputation can go off the rails. This is a technique called stop, talking, start counting. So imagine, Leslie, the question comes to you. Many people, their first reaction is to blurt out the answer as fast as they can, figuring I'm going to sound smart and God, I'm on it. I know my stuff. I teach the complete opposite. Do not speak when that question comes. Take a deep breath. Buy some time and let that whoever asked the question know that you are taking time to formulate the answer. So as you are taking that deep breath, now you know it in yoga, you know it in any sporting event, the actors will teach you this. Get control of the breath. Count to 1, 2, 3. Now that may seem agonizing to anyone who's on the other end of it. Let them agonize because you're about to destroy your reputation. If you say something that causes self-inflicted harm, it usually comes because somebody was too quick in the reaction. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. You don't have the luxury to backpedal anymore. So really what I'm describing, Leslie, is a technique of emotional regulation that starts with every question and response. Don't answer it. Take a couple of seconds. What I do with my coaches, I snap the finger, little music theory. 1, 2, 3. I don't care how impatient somebody gets on the other end. This is your response. You own it. You own the best of it. You own the worst of it. So take the time under this age of massive distraction and acceleration of communication. Take the time to commit to slow it down. Simple technique, but
It makes sense to me because as I started getting involved in meditation, when my jobs got more pressureful, I learned breathing techniques, box breathing and other, which is also a kind of a military approach to help people calm before battle. I feel like the physiology is there, to your point, right? You take that breath and your body reacts then to the breath, not to the emotion.
it is. But tell me, the best college course you had, did it include this?
No,
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 no.
no.
I never learned it till there was an app called Calm.
Exactly.
That's where I learned it. And I learned that these breathing techniques, they don't have to be the same breathing techniques. Most of them are just about being aware of your breathing and then the methodical approach you use to breathe to get your physiology in order. That was huge for me. When I went on stage the very first time at Amazon, I did a box breathing exercise while they were introducing me, and it just changed the whole adrenaline flow.
Right,
For me.
but let's consider our formal education. We test for intellect. We don't test for adaptation. We don't test for what happens under the weight of that pressure. And this is, I think, my 9 years at Columbia University. I'm so joyful. It's such a wonderful institution to have educated the engineers at the whole of them, to become not just engineers, but working professionals who are counted on to raise the bar on that professionalism. They are startled and stunned that I open up my classes this way. And then a year later, after they graduate, they come back to me, and after they started at Google and Amazon and all those places that where you have been involved in, and they come back and said, "Oh my God, we had no idea. The engineering, that's pretty easy. We're good at that. But God, managing the people, the distractions, the pressures, the spontaneity of saying something that you didn't mean to say. I am just on a crusade, Leslie. These are subjects that should be taught at the earliest level to students, dancers, athletes. It should be required. All that ridiculousness that I learned, and so much of it I could have dispensed with. So I'm a champion for that. I hope I can influence others.
Absolutely. You know, when I was doing research for my book, Creative Velocity, one of the things I spent a lot of time learning about not only was emotional regulation and equanimity, but Stoic philosophy and how together they can really enhance one's capacity to think creatively and solve problems that are maybe ones they've not seen before. What's your perspective on how those things might actually aid in creative capacity? We're talking a little bit about how they might help you organize your thinking and your response to a particular situation. But practicing these things over time, do you see how they might be able to help your creative capacity or your problem solving skills?
Yeah, well, let me first state how much I enjoyed your book, and I connected to it probably most when you started. I don't remember maybe it was chapter 5. I forget where you began to introduce the Stoicism. My book, The Moment That Defines Your Life, I knew that there was an emotional intelligence book in. Didn't know exactly what it was. I knew there was a philosopher, there was a Stoic. I came to Stoicism, and my TED talk last month was how I came to Stoicism. But there were a lot of books on EQ. There's plenty of books on Stoic philosophy. But what I found is a gap in the marketplace. And in the modern world of where I teach people, I teach the mindset of the Stoic philosopher, and I teach the techniques of emotional intelligence. So what I found is my best practice is to combine the elements of the two. So where it comes to Stoic philosophy, and let me back up for context. The people that I coach are very powerful people. They are typically married with children. They also have an expectation that they want to control everything. They want to control the weather. They want to control the traffic, and they get very upset when that doesn't happen. You know the type, Leslie. You have spent your time in the Pacific Northwest and California, Northern California, surrounded by them. Am I right? So what do? All of that energy, that the allocation of that energy that is focused on those things by which they have no control are diminishing their capacity. Now, in your book for the creative philosophy, you very much talked about the integration of the technology with the creative, and very much like the Pixar world where they combine intellect, storytelling, and all those wonderful things you talk about. In my world, this is very much a Wall Street world. The creativity comes from the capacity to tell a story that is different than their competitors. If I can help someone replace the allocation of all that negative energy to something they can't control. So imagine that 20% of your day was trying to control the traffic. What a colossal waste of energy. What if when you were stuck on that 495 going 5 miles an hour, instead of yelling and screaming and honking, which burns a lot of energy, what if you could clear the mind? Put on our podcast or put on Led Zeppelin or Billy Joel or something else or Mozart, whoever, and you begin to use that. So you're supplanting energy from one form, negative and potentially toxic, to something that allows you to clear the mind, because it's only in the clarity of the mind do good things happen. Whether it's a creative principle or simply being clear and concise about a message you're trying to communicate. And that's, Leslie, why I connected to your book so well, because you and I were kindred spirits. We were writing the book from different places for different purposes, yet the core of it was very similar.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm struck by also in what you're saying in clearing mind space for not only creative thinking but also clarity of thought. Just the idea that you're saying that what is the essence comes through when you have that space in your brain. Where does flow fit into your work, in a flow state? And how do you think about the importance of getting into a flow state in that same sense? Because I think when you're stuck in traffic and you're aggravated by the things you can't control, you're never going to hit a flow state. You're never going to hit that space where your subconscious and your conscious can bring ideas together, bigger ideas than maybe you could do if you were just focused on the moment.
Well, I don't expect, and I think it's clear, and I'm glad you pointed that out. We don't expect the flow states to hit in situations like that. They hit in other places. But I know I became a part of my mountaineering experience. I became a rock climber and an ice climber. And I found that when you're rock climbing, you only have one thing to think about, and that's your next step. There's nothing else that exists in the world. And what I do in my practice, I try to apply the principles of the fact that it's like a chess match. You got one move. What's that move going to be? And the reason I try to get everyone to only move one step at a time, when you're dealing with highly intelligent people, their minds are racing 100 miles an hour. And there's a stream of consciousness that they may be able to understand. But to the mere idiot like me, I don't get it. I'm just not that smart. You got all that stuff coming at me. I don't know what to process. So where the flow state comes in, helping people in the mind to slow it down, because what we're doing is we're eliminating the crowd. You're eliminating the noise. You cannot hit a flow state when your mind is filled with 100 things. But that mind of 100 things, that's no one's fault. That's our responsibility, and it's a learned behavior to understand how do I drown out and how do I rise above all of that noise. And this is where the beauty of Stoic philosophy and emotional intelligence intersect. It's being calm, it's being self-aware, and recognizing, okay, let me drown out the traffic. Let me drown out the noise. Let me drown out everything else. You're almost doing it by process of elimination until you finally get to that point where what you talked about in your book, you hit a certain point, you got to keep going. Sometimes it's unexpected. You don't know what it's going to have, but you have to give yourself the runway for that creative velocity. You talked about the foundations of the mind, because if you don't get the foundation right, you get nothing right. So that's what I do for a different purpose, though, helping them. Let's take our time. Let's breathe. Let's focus on one thing. I deal with people that try to focus on 100 things at a time, and they end up doing nothing. So we got to boil it down to its minimum. Forget the apps. Put away the phone. Put away the devices. Your mind is an amazing thing, but we don't use it sufficiently.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of What If with Leslie Grandy. If you'd like to learn more about how we can work together to expand your organization's capacity to innovate, to leverage AI as a strategic thought partner, and to inspire your teams to think bigger and take intelligent risks, visit lesliegrandy.com today. I'm curious how you feel about maintaining the sort of human-centered Stoic values in a world that's rapidly depending on generative AI for content creation and communication. And I'm wondering if you feel that there's any specific technique that people should use in order to balance that sort of machine-driven thinking versus the really human-centered values that really are at the core of Stoic philosophy.
Yeah, that's a much more difficult question to answer because you are actually talking about how the future is going to look. We don't know. But why Stoic philosophy tends to continue to garner attention 4,000 years after this philosopher named Epictetus started to talk in Athens, Greece, on what's called the painted porch, which we now call Stoicism. No matter how much AI is in front of us, when that day is done and we're heading to sleep, it's not going with us. And when we wake up, it's not here. Our minds have an immense capacity, and yet I'm actually saddened a bit that we're so infatuated with artificial intelligence. I still think we have neglected completely emotional intelligence. So I think the great leaders, now you've been around many of them in your world in the Silicon Valley as I have on Wall Street. I'm not saying they dismiss AI. I think that they're just putting it up on the shelf and it's just another tool. But in the end, they are in front of their 32,000 employees. Your AI may write your speech for you, but it's not going to recite it. In the end, I think the best leaders hold themselves accountable for the delivery of their communication. Even if they don't write it, have someone else write it, that's okay. I just think the infatuation is overdone. The people that I work with are great human beings who have accelerated to an incredible point in their careers, not without the help of these technologies you're describing, but recognizing that you can't hold AI accountable for my mistakes. I make them, I own them. So I don't know. I'm not as enthusiastic as everyone else. I face it. I know we have to work with it. It will be a companion to leadership. I will be saddened the day that the machines start running the companies and the very smart, great leaders of the world are pushed to the side. And when that day happens, I think that'll be a sad day for humanity.
You know, it's funny. I go back, hearing you talk now, I go back to your initial comments about what makes a great speaker, what makes a great leader, what really motivates people in storytelling and in communications, where you as a leader have to move large groups of people towards some idea that maybe doesn't exist in reality yet, but you want them to make come to life. And I think what you say in that what you said in that earlier point is that it really strikes a chord, right? It creates an emotional connection that motivates people around them to follow their lead. What I find with AI is that lack of emotion, right? I can read a correct answer or maybe an incorrect answer because I get a lot of those too. But what I never get is moved. I never get moved, right? Like I get data and insight and even a well constructed sentence or paragraph, but that reaction that you sort of describe around being moved by the speaker to some higher idea or ideal about what should be never has come from any of my interactions with AI. And I think when people so quickly cut and paste from AI into their work, they miss the layer of resonance, right? That connection that really will get people to activate against the idea. And that's where I'm always struggling myself with when I talk about my work is that you own the values, you own the emotion, and you own the impact of communicating whatever AI told you. And so if it's something that's interesting or intellectually curious, that's great. But what's its value? What's it bringing to the audience, to the customer, or to your team if it doesn't have that emotional resonance?
Well, you're talking about Steve Jobs, I'll put him in there. Martin Luther King moved people to a cause. Winston Churchill fighting for the existential uh, Western world, the free world. What the three of them did, and that's why I'm going to put Jobs in there, as I was a student of the three of them. I admired them immensely for how they were able to build communities, how they were able to spread the values of the thing that made them tick. Steve Jobs was certainly at Apple on the forefront of let's call this AI, but Mandela and King and Churchill were not. And when we think about the great orators of the world, and let's throw Abraham Lincoln in there, look at what they were capable of doing before we even talked about this. So I think AI is just going to make us lazy. I think it's going to have us take our eye off the leadership ball. I think it's just too convenient to say, yeah, chalk it up to AI. Let AI write the books. Oh my God. We are capable of so much more, yet we try to find, I don't want to say it's the easy way, and I'm not disparaging AI. It's a wonderful thing. I'm just cautionary about it because the leaders, whoever they are, they got to make the call. They need to be accountable for that call. AI is only going to help them so much. And how do they succeed? By moving people to the cause, by helping them to exceed their own expectations. And if you have an organization where the majority of people are doing that, you'll be the next Apple. If you don't, you'd just be mired in mediocrity.
Absolutely. I'm curious at the more that you've coached and more people that you've seen and the experiences that you've had climbing mountains and in the moments that had defined your life. Do you find yourself ever falling back into old habits? Do you find yourself still struggling to manage an emotional situation? And what tends to be the reason that you think that you just don't have your handle on it 100% of the time? I would say the reason would be because you're human. But I mean, in terms of what are the circumstances or the characteristics of those situations where you find I've really got to take a step back and regroup?
Well, it happens a lot. I can't say that I fall into old habits because I'm so conscious. I live by everything that I teach, and I appreciate that it's always on my mind in every interaction that what I cannot do, even though I don't like what I'm hearing, is to be a jerk. Because my most embarrassing moment in my Bloomberg years, I had two very embarrassing moments. And one of them was when I let loose on a substandard employee in front of 100 people and completely lost it. I wanted to crawl under the desk and never return to the company. People saw me in a very different light. Here I was, 5 years in a wonderful ascension, and I was about to kill it in 5 seconds of a completely despicable behavior. So that's where I found AI. I was like, oh my God, I got to fix this problem. So to answer your question, I am incredibly conscious, and I have been since I started teaching this, to slow things down, to listen intently. And this is a practice, Leslie. This is not just a matter of habit. This is a matter of intention. When somebody is speaking to me, just as I'm doing now. I am patient. I look them in the eye, and I will listen. I will be free to disagree, even if they don't like what I'm going to say. I will always disagree with respect, and I will always be honest. What I cannot be anymore is a jerk. I have those tendencies, and I think we all do in the careers that we were in, because it's very easy to light a fuse when you don't like being at the table with someone you can't stand, but we have to deal with them too. So I don't think that I revert to those behaviors, because if I did, I would be a phony, and it would be the worst thing that I could do. But instead, I am conscious every minute of every day to act with good intention, but to still be tough, to stand my ground, but to do so with respect. That, Leslie, is what should be taught in school. These acts of intentions as it relates to our behavior. And if we could teach all kids to do that and then give them a grade, then maybe we'll pay attention. This is foundational to what you and I both do, why we wrote about it in our books. Active acts of intention all the time. Burns a lot of energy, but since I have no noise in my head, I have plenty of energy for it.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you talk about being taught in school. I remember being taught organizational behavior as if the company itself was a human and was operating with behavioral norms, right? And
Good point. I hate that term.
right, and that was the whole subset of
That was a thing.
school, right? Was
Right.
organizational behavior, and this monolithic organization behaved in a way. It wasn't even called culture. Even it was just sort of, this is how the monolith moves, right? This is how things get done. And I think in that same vein, there was never a conversation about not only emotional intelligence, but employee behavior that gives you a career, employee behavior that makes you a leader, even when you don't manage people, right?
Or what is not tolerated, behavior that has no place here. You can do it somewhere else, but not here, not at this table.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, again, in my own research that I realized that as a leader, those emotions actually clamp down other people's ability to be creative, right? Because they're more attuned to what reaction they're going to get from me, rather than what's the right thing to do.
Right.
And I think that became a real aha moment for me when you were just talking about what you learn in school. All I could remember was organizational behavior, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember anyone coaching me. And I had executive coaches in the beginning of my career, and mostly they were trying to teach you how to fit into that culture, not how to be a better leader.
That is wrong. No. In fact, if you take them to fit into that culture, then you get groupthink. That's the worst thing that could happen. You should be, at least in what I try to do, help them to be distinct. That doesn't mean that your behavior is contrary to the culture, but you never want them to fit in such that they're just saying yes to everything, and that's where companies get destroyed, where it becomes such a force that it just buries organizational cultures.
I know, and what I found also, and I'm sure this is the same in your work with engineers, that consensus is the death of individual thinking, right? That the fact that you're aiming for consensus is giving up on the value of an individual's contribution, right?
Oh, you just get people to cave in. It's a lot easier to say, yeah, you know what? I agree with everybody. That's great. That's the demise of a culture. That is wrong. Ultimately, though, I will say, whoever is the leader in the room is the one that needs to make the call. Whoever, him, her, it doesn't matter. And to be held accountable for it. How do you hold accountable for it? Now, it's organizational behavior, but it's the sum of the individuals who are working with you to exceed that mission's expectations. And that's done all day, every day. But that one person is responsible for the entire thing. And the minute we stop that accountability, that company is in a bad place.
Absolutely. One last question I have before we wrap up. You had mentioned earlier also about things you can control and things you can't control, and the importance of sort of accepting those things. When you're in a company, you often feel like you're expected to control everything that you're responsible for. How do you coach people to break free from the constraint of thinking I'm responsible for everything, and therefore if something goes awry that's unexpected, that's on me? What are the ways that you help people kind of recover from that belief of the difference between sort of accountability and responsibility and actual control?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a much more difficult question just because there's a lot to it, but I'll give you my summary. Unfortunately, what a lot of leaders do, if they're accountable for something, but they don't know the answer to something that should be in their purview, many of them talk for about 2 minutes and say absolutely nothing. They feel that they need to respond, so they're just blabbing away. It's just balderdash and just corporate speak. The leaders that I work with sometimes have a very difficult time admitting they don't know something. And that goes back to the legacy of their education because we were punished when we didn't get something right. We were rewarded for getting something right and punished for getting something wrong. So here's the crazy thing. That vulnerability they feel is a weakness, but it gets them into a whole lot of trouble when they're not vulnerable. So it starts with the admission that I don't know the answer to your question. It should come out just as quickly as that and be comfortable in the discomfort that you don't know something. But here's where the stoicism comes in. The minute you think that you're supposed to know everything, you're screwed. Because all of us are capable of doing anything, but we can't do everything. And this is where the Stoic philosophy says, what I can't control, I don't know it, but here's the good news. I know someone who does. So you're going to have to check with John in accounting. He's going to give you the answer. And if he doesn't get you the answer you need, come back to me. I'll find you who do. Just the admission of not knowing what you don't know is a beautiful thing because it keeps you from causing any further self-inflicted harm. This is where they get into trouble. And sometimes just the simple admission, I don't know, but I'll find out where. Such a simple thing, but some people have a very difficult time, especially the control freaks. They have a hard time letting go and accepting the fact that they're not perfect. Just take a very deep breath and get them comfortable in their imperfections. That has been the biggest challenge of my coaching career. Getting someone to admit, oh my God, you mean I can actually admit that I don't know? Of course you can. How can you expect it? But that's an expectation. And
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, I felt that myself in the career that people look to me as the person who should know, and I'm letting them down if I indicate that I don't. And so I recognize that trap.
But your framework, your mindset, Leslie, just by saying that I'm letting them down, I'm trying to get them to change that mindset. I'm not letting you down. I'm pointing you in the right direction because I'm going to make the call, but I can't know everything. So I'm going to be accountable if I have all, and I'm never going to have all the facts. You're never going to have 100% of what you need to make the decision. But the mindset is I'm not letting you down. Joe, Bill, whoever is asking you that question, I don't know the answer, but I know who does. I'm never disappointed by what I don't know because I don't know much. But what I do know, I know damn well. So they can count on me for that. And I think that's a headspace. That's helping people get comfortable in the fact that you're not expected to know everything. It's your limiting belief that you need to know it that is getting you into trouble.
Absolutely. I think after this conversation, I'm going to go back and read the book again because I feel like I have a different lens on it now. I was very personally projecting myself in the stories in your book. And so I was really kind of looking for the resonance with my own experience. But now hearing the way you talk about it, I want to look at it at a different altitude. Like I want to see it from a higher altitude and see how all the stories share a common thread with each other as opposed to with me. And I think I'll get a completely different set of things from it. I really appreciate your time today. Before we wrap up, how can people find out more about your work and learn about what you do as a life elevation coach?
You bet. Well, thank you for having me, Leslie. It's a pleasure. So for anyone, the listeners or viewers, if you know my name, Chuck Garcia, and you add a .com, that's how you can get to me. So when you go to chuckgarcia.com, there is a contact tab. Just hit it there. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. You can certainly find me there. I don't use many other social media. And I'll give you my email address. My company is called Climb, as climb a mountain, but not everybody spells climb the way they hear it. Some people spell CLIME. So Chuck at climbleadership.com. That's my email address. But go to my website. I should have my videos and things I talk about. But on LinkedIn, I post every couple months something that I think is interesting that you can learn from me. But wherever you find me, it's just a pleasure to be able to connect to your network. And I'm grateful, Leslie, for the opportunity to do this.
Like I said, I learn a lot from this conversation that supplements what I learned from the first time reading the book. So
Same.
It's awesome. I really appreciate you, and thank you for joining me today for What If with Leslie Grandy. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to What If with Leslie Grandy. If you want to learn more about creative leadership in the age of generative AI, subscribe to my Substack at lesliegrandy.substack.com.